lecturer. I'm a professor in strategic project management at Lancaster University Management School. I started my professional career as a programmer slash systems analyst and realized early on that I was attracted to both the hybrid aspects, both the technical and the managerial. Pretty early on, I was working on a number of IT projects that didn't feel right, although they were termed success. We never delivered on time, we never delivered on budget. So I started collecting IT failures, and that goes back a few years now. And gradually I developed the world's largest collection of failures. Somewhere along the line, I became slightly less fussy. So they're not just IT, they're any management failures. And that took me towards looking at projects perhaps as the scene where some of the problems are happening, or the reason why a lot of it is happening. I started researching it. And I remember during my, when I was working on my PhD, during my Viva, the examiner said to me, "I think the problem is projects." And I'd forgotten it for a long time, and I just remembered it recently. So I seem to be hovering in that kind of space, thinking about different things. I'm involved in a number of initiatives. I'll mention them as I go through my challenges. I was told I had 5 minutes, so I thought 5 challenges would be good. So I focused on 5 key challenges. I think just before we start, the first one is really moving beyond good intentions. We all have good intentions. We all think we want to do the best, but there are a number of things that keep occurring, that keep plaguing our projects. And I thought I'd take a slightly different perspective, so focus perhaps more on the managerial, on the assumption that some of the technical will come up with. And I think my first one is the need for a change in focus. Projects have been conceived for a long time as something that has a beginning and an end. It's a short-term activity that takes place and then disappears. And with that come all sorts of issues. And what we need to do is probably change perspective and focus towards projects as value creation. We do projects for a reason, and it's that purpose that should play a much bigger part. We're fixated on artifact delivery, but there are big implications around who we are delivering for and what we are doing with our projects. So really focusing beyond outputs, looking at outcomes, but looking at value creation. If a project is value creation, there's a purpose in what we are doing. And that takes me to the second challenge, and that's thinking about the users. It's something that as a systems analyst 30 years ago, it was key, it was absolutely essential to what we were doing. In project, the users don't count. A project is about delivery of something, you intended, you delivered it, you're done. And we need to have a greater emphasis on the users of systems, which also takes us towards longer term implications. We are moving towards looking at the use of systems. We have greater interest in sustainability. We want systems to last for longer, which takes me to the third point, which is the long-term impact. We've had for a long time that projects are constructed as short-term instruments. So we optimize them just to deliver quickly and run away. Really, we need to start focusing on sustainable development, longer-term impacts, longer considerations, thinking beyond the users. So I'm building on what we've had so far. I was lucky enough or unfortunate enough to write the body of knowledge for the Association for Project Management. And I tried shifting the perspective there from looking at projects as those small things that deliver. You deliver pizza, you don't deliver a project, towards doing it, creating value in a bigger, more significant, more sustainable way. I'm also the editor-in-chief of a journal that focuses on challenges in software engineering. And some of the new work that's being done on software as service and open source and continuous integration and DevOps, of course, with development and operations work together all the time, means we have to take that longer term perspective. So that is absolutely essential and absolutely important. And I'll just touch on 2 other issues, if I may. My fourth one is trust, or perhaps the death of expertise. Over the pandemic, we've seen the demise of experts. We're exposed to a lot of information. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of data out there, and talk about on social media about alternative truth, about echo chambers. People hear what they want to hear. So it's becoming more and more difficult to get verified knowledge, verified expertise, and we need to rely on some of the expertise, certainly when we're pushing forward new technologies, when we're trying to convince people to accept new ways. It's difficult to remain objective, though. There's a lot of counter opinions, the alternative truths, alternative ways of looking at things. And therefore, to link all of those things together, finally, my fifth and final aspect is to do with professionalism and really about responsible project management, responsible development, responsible decision-making. So making decisions that take into account the longer term, that take into account the users, that actually do not look at recipes, but better ways of reflecting, better ways of thinking about what we are doing, better ways of becoming responsible people so that we can be viewed with more trust and take the longer term perspective and deal with some of the, and involve users and stakeholders and really create value that's meaningful to society. We can't afford to waste so much anymore. We really need to focus on what we can deliver successfully. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. And Katrina.
Thanks so much, Neil. I'm joining you today from Western Canada, where it's still morning, but I'm excited to be here. I think this is going to be a really great conversation. My name is Katrina Ingram, and I run a social enterprise called Ethically Aligned AI. And I got started in this area in 2018. I actually had gone back to school to do a master's degree. And as part of that journey, I wandered into a talk that was being given by some prominent AI researchers. And similar to what Darren was just saying, these researchers were talking about AI gone wrong scenarios. And that really became the focus of my research and really kind of inspired the launch of my company. So I'm not a traditional technologist. I don't have a computer science background or a data science background. I come into this work more from the social services side of things. And because of that, I really do think a lot about socio-technical systems. So a lot of what Darren was just saying really resonates with me because I think about the intersection of technology and people, whether that's in the context of a project or in the context of an organization or in the bigger context of society at large. So some of the things that I've been talking about recently, I do a lot of workshops and training when it comes to AI and ethics and how to build responsibility into your programs, whether you're building AI systems or deploying them. But I've been talking a bit about sort of three ethical camps that I see. One has to do with control. And so when I think about the ways that the systems are developing, especially as we build ever larger and larger models, we're really consolidating power into the hands of a very few companies around the world. And so there's a lot of issues that are related to that in terms of inequity and who actually has control of these particular systems. So that's kind of one bucket of ethical considerations. Then there are all the use cases that we're applying these technologies to. And in some cases, those use cases are reasonable and well thought out. In other cases, there's a rush to put AI everywhere, move it into everything really quickly. And I think we're seeing that a lot with generative AI in particular. It seems like everybody's trying to incorporate it into every kind of use case, and it's not always appropriate. And so I think we need to have some conversation about the ethics of the particular use case. And then the last bucket that I think a lot about is the design. How are we actually building these systems? What are the choices that we've made? And this perhaps touches a little bit more closely on things that Darren was talking about with respect to professional responsibility. What are your responsibilities as people who work in this field to ensure that the design of these systems is done in ways that are responsible and ethical? So those are kind of the three big camps that I've been talking about lately. More recently, I've also been speculating on kind of a fourth camp, and that's this idea of framing or how we think about AI at a bigger scale. And I've been particularly watching the discussion of AGI in recent days, of course, with this whole OpenAI situation. There's been all this speculation now about, do we have AGI? And I just think about the bigger framing conversation that needs to happen here in terms of the ethics of how we're thinking about these technologies, whether these are, inherently things that are inevitable or not, or how we can kind of change the narrative. So that's kind of a more recent, I will say, work in progress set of thoughts that I'm having, but I'm happy to go there as well. So that's a little bit about me and some of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of my work.
Thanks, Katrina. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Adam. Interesting start, and yeah, some very interesting, important points. So the idea we got for this panel was to have some general questions the panel to go through, and then obviously for the audience to be able to add their own. So the meeting chat, put a prompt in there. Do add your own questions now in the chat if you want to type them in. If you'd like to ask a question live, for us to help organise it, if you want to raise your virtual hand, so in Zoom, go to Reactions, raise hand, and then we can invite you to ask the panel the question. So I've got a few questions to start with that are more general ones. I think partly they've been addressed thinking much of what the panel have said, but I suppose one of the big ones we've come across from our own survey on ethics AI, but also I know my own experiences trying to include ethical things in my teaching at times is at a university here, students, and sometimes in a way more concerningly, colleagues sometimes don't see why we're doing ethics at all. So my question to the panel, I think, is why does ethics in computing matter? Who wants to go first?
Oh, go ahead, Darren.
You doing? I'm sure you want to go first then.
Yeah, why don't I jump in while we get the technology sorted out? Yeah, I think it's interesting. So my actual research was really talking to AI researchers, PhD students, about ethics. And does it matter? What are you thinking about? Is it on your agenda? And I found out that it wasn't. That was sort of the conclusion that I came to, similar to what you're saying, Neil. And part of that was because it wasn't really valued. And I think that is, that is something that we need to change. I think it is starting to change, or at least I'm seeing early signs of that, as professors are talking about ways to incorporate ethics into the curriculum. There are specific people, for example, at the university that I went to, that have been hired to really push that into the computing science agenda at large. And the reason I think it's important is because the ways in which technology are intersecting with our lives are ubiquitous. So we think about anything these days. I often say that it's not just about being a tech company. The grocery store is now a tech company. Your car company is now a tech company. Data is everywhere. Technology is everywhere. And all of these things have real material impacts for people's lives. So it's no longer, I think, an option to think, well, we're just going to isolate ourselves and think about these issues from just a technical standpoint. I think because technology is so ubiquitous and impacting everyone, we have to contend with ethics. We have to make it important.
Thanks, Darren. Do you want to try now?
Yes, thank you. I had an interesting experience. I was running a workshop at the British Academy of Management, and I had quite a few people, and the workshop was focused on the connection between strategy and execution. So moving from ideas to action. And I tried organizing people in the room. I had about 140 people. It was a full-packed room. And I tried organizing them to stand up along where they were between strategy and execution and position themselves. And there was one person at the extreme end. Everybody else was somehow in the middle, close to other people in groups. And there was one person standing on their own at the very, very end. And I was working through the crowd, and then eventually I got to the person at the end and I said, so what's your take? And he said, well, I didn't like your introduction. Anyhow, you were talking about those soft things about users and stakeholders. He said, I'm from IT, and I've been an IT project manager for a long time, and I'm told what to do, and I go and deliver it, and I'm really good at doing it. But don't tell me the soft things about people and expectations and all those things. People come back to me. I've been doing it all my life. I follow all the American standards. He was a developer from Washington, D.C., doing a lot of work for US government. I'm told what to do and I go and deliver it. And I don't care if people like it or not, or if they use it or not. I do exactly what they were asking. So there's an interesting position there. We can isolate themselves, but when I'm thinking back to where they started, there was a much greater emphasis on the users and what they were hoping to achieve from the system. We live in an age where resources are constrained. We're coming out at the tail end of a pandemic where there's limitation. We need to start taking responsibility for the environment. So a lot of the decisions that we make actually make a difference. A lot of the choices that we take, a lot of the technical decisions, design decisions, a lot of the constraints, everything that we do along the process can make a big difference. It's easy to say, not my problem, and I've had it said to me many times. But ultimately, if we want to be treated as professionals, if we're going to say, well, we need responsible people to manage technology, responsible people to manage the impacts of technology, then we need to become responsible for our actions. And ethics provides a framework, together with morality, a way of looking at what we are doing and determining, is this fair, is this acceptable, is this equitable? Especially as we start recognizing that we are we are trying to balance different things: long-term, short-term, time, cost, who's going to be impacted. If we do this, what will the impact be? So it's balancing a lot of different factors and trying to find a sensible way of dealing through all of that. So professionalism is key, and having some kind of a moral basis and an ethical perspective can make a big difference to our decisions.
Nice, Darren. Adam, you have any further points?
Yes, sure. I think historically it's always kind of been seen like within IT, kind of ethics is almost like that hindrance. It's kind of like, oh, do I have to follow that? Do I need to do that? I just want to get this thing out, and it shouldn't matter about those kind of things, but it should. And I feel, especially now during this time, we're trying to become a more kind of fairer based like society. And I feel, especially now for a lot of big organizations and things like that, they're trying to show that they are kind of trustworthy, fair. They do their processing in the right way. They're trying to be more transparent, to kind of show that we're not just doing some magic in the background and you just have to deal with it. Then that's what we're doing with our tech. It's kind of more, this is what we're trying to do. This is how we're doing it. This is why we're doing that kind of thing. And I think having that side in there now is much more important, to kind of show that you are one of those types of companies. You've got your kind of you've got the standards at the moment now with like ESG, for example. You're showing that you're environmental, you're showing that you're social, you're doing all these kind of things. But you need to also, on the side of that, show your ethical side, to show that you are a business that care and are fair, kind of thing.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I guess in this room we all probably see as important. But yeah, it is, like Darren said, I had an experience once with a colleague saying you need to put I need to put ethics in his course because of accreditation requirements. And he was so he couldn't see how it was relevant to his course. And he taught AI, and he entirely saw it was technical and couldn't see any ethical aspect of AI. And it was quite a strange experience. It was like talking to a wall for a while. But thanks, all. So we've got a few questions actually in the chat. So rather than go to the standard questions, we can maybe start with some of the ones from the audience as well. So you can see them in terms of Paul's put one in: will governments and big business listen to the concerns about ethics of technology and AI? Again, very relevant given the recent summit at Bletchley Park and the upcoming white paper on ethics and AI. So again, anyone wants to start on that?
Sure, I can. So yeah, as you were saying, we've just had that AI summit in Bletchley Park just the beginning of this month, where multiple governments across the world are trying to come together to start, at least begin a kind of ethical standard across the world. You have other initiatives like the EU initiative, where they're trying to set their standards on kind of like ethics within AI. But again, I think it goes back to that kind of point of trying to build that kind of like, especially on the big businesses guys. I'm hoping that people will start trying to do their ethical policies and things like that and become more transparent, because then, similar to like the environmental kind of side, I would hope that if a company's not doing that, it would be kind of almost like outcast or shamed that they're not doing the right thing, or they're like, well, we're just going to do that, we don't care. And then, but hopefully people would actually say, no, well, I'm not going to spend my hard-earned money buying your products or doing anything with your services because you're not doing it in a fair and just way.
Yeah, I would
Adam?
absolutely echo what Adam is saying. And I think this idea of social license or social legitimacy is really important. Certainly governments really understand that, i.e. they may not get elected if they don't do things the right way. And I think business understands that too. And I sometimes will also, in case people need a little more incentive, let's say, I will bring this into a risk conversation for businesses and talk about things like reputational risk, and what happens when you see your name splashed up in those bad headlines, very bad things. So let's avoid that. What happens when your employees, and a lot of Gen Z really wants to live their values, for example, they don't want to work for your company because you're not doing the right things. What happens when there are regulations and there are fines attached to those regulations and you're going to have to pay those fines? What happens when someone comes along and says, you're going to have to blow up that algorithmic system, as was done in the case of Weight Watchers in the United States, because you didn't get the data acquired in a responsible way, and now you have to rip out millions of dollars worth of work. So all of these kinds of things, I think, have real tangible business consequences as well, in addition to doing the right thing. So sometimes I'll put those risk conversations into play when I'm having these talks with businesses.
And I suppose following on from that, specifically from doing the right thing, that there's a greater emphasis on the kind of values that companies have, and even governments are being forced to talk more to purpose. There's greater recognition of purpose in people and the kind of values that they're holding. There's also a greater emphasis on longer term perspective. So if we're taking longer term perspective, thinking about the resources, thinking about sustainability, thinking about global warming, we need to become more responsible. We need to position some of our decisions differently. I was reading yesterday some new research about the impacts of AI in terms of escalating energy demand. So it was specifically looking at the kind of the searches that we're doing. And it was saying, if you convert a normal Google search into an AI-driven search, it'll be 10 times more intensive in terms of energy requirements. And over time, that can build up. If you took all the inquiries that people are doing currently on Google and did them using AI, the argument was that would be equivalent to the total energy consumption of Ireland. So if we're encouraging people to change behaviors, we need to become more responsible in terms of the expectations, but also look at the potential impacts of what we're doing. Technology can offer great advances, but we need to be thinking about the implications on different parts of societies, different parts of our community, and also the implications elsewhere, including on energy and resources that we or don't have.
Yeah, on just to add to that, we've seen stuff on that side where we're on our property side. There's been a huge demand in kind of data centers, and of course, pulled back from all this AI kind of prompting and aside from that side. So it's becoming a huge environmental resource now as well. Even I think there's stats, as you were just saying, kind of, I think even just not only on the electricity side, but even on the water side, I think it's like every, looking at my quote now, about 20 to 50 prompts, it's about half a litre of water, which is crazy. And it's just, as we're producing more and more and more of this, and it's becoming more used, these strains will add on. So it's, again, it's whether that's you can actually continue that way, or is there a way to kind of reduce that kind of environmental impact as well?
Yeah, thanks, Odie. It's a really important point. I think the yes, Paul, do you want to add any sort of feedback on that?
There we go. Yeah, I kept pressing space, but my finger moved. Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. I think I hadn't even thought of the resource side of it in terms of the impact on ecology and the environment. You know, and I think, yeah, there's quite. I think we're in that sort of crossroads where people are using the ubiquity of IT is such that people forget about what happens, you know, once it leaves their computer and it's being handled by. They don't really. I get the feeling some people don't care that much about what happens to their request or their query, as long as it comes back in a reasonable time and they get an answer. And you know, I suppose they only really worry about ethics when something directly affects them. So they suddenly go, hang on a minute, I can't believe that, you know, they suddenly know that I'm in the interest of buying a greenhouse. Well, there's a very good reason why you're now getting loads of stuff on Facebook about greenhouses. And, you know, how dare they? Well, you have a quick look at the end user license agreement and the, you know, so I think there is certainly a level of impact that people don't immediately understand. I think part of whatever happens in terms of you know, I think my reason for asking the question about whether government and big business, particularly government, would listen, is that they quite like giving and receiving very easy answers to everything, and I don't think the answers are that simple. Certainly, that's something that they can sell to the electorate around introducing extra controls and laws, which I think are necessary, particularly for AI. So, and the fact that, you know, I had a chat the other day about, you know, talking about AI, and they were talking about how wonderful it is. I think it's wonderful, but if we're in a situation where the AI is doing all the creative stuff, doing paintings and drawings and writing music, and the people are on 0-hour contracts, you know, working, that's not a fair use of AI. So I think we're in very early stages, and I'm not particularly hopeful of government buy-in in terms of controls and thinking about ethics. So yeah, but thank you for the answers to the responses to my question.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Darren's got your hand up.
Sorry, yes, just to jump in again, thinking about governments and large corporations using it, I think ethics is becoming a necessity, and many are forced to use it, but it can be used fully and properly as a lens and a perspective. It can also be used as a tick box approach. We've done due ethics, we've done due governance, so it is useful in encouraging a wider perspective. It is useful in getting people to think. However, governments can also do the tick box approach and said, okay, we've talked to one stakeholder, we've had our consultation, we've all seen those kinds of processes, and a tick box approach can be an insufficient way of doing ethics sometimes. I'll stop there, I think.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Okay, so another question we've got from Akinyemi, talking about the bias in AI, because machine learning data sets can be biased. Is research being done to deliberately introduce these biases into AI to gain insights to improve its understanding and look at how you might counteract that type of bias? And then the follow-up to that is, how do you define ethics in that kind of a case?
I talk a lot about bias as it exists in AI, not because someone's deliberately trying to introduce it, but because a lot of the training data sets that are used have bias in them for all kinds of reasons. And so then the system becomes biased. But I think you're asking a different question in that in this situation, someone's doing research that is deliberately trying to create bias in AI, but then they want to fix that bias. And I guess my response to that is, first of all, I guess I think there's a lot of biased AI, so I'm not quite sure why they would need to introduce more bias in AI and then say they want to fix it. But I think in terms of, you know, containment and what happens in a lab versus what happens in the real world. And so I suppose if there might be some good reasons, and I'm not familiar with this piece of research or what these reasons might be or what kind of bias might be introduced, and it was contained in a research environment, then perhaps there could be a case to do this in the name of research and advancement and that sort of thing. But I guess I'm just a little bit confused by the question as to why.
I did read something quite a while back. I think it was an MIT thing, trying to just find it now. Nightshade, there you go. There was a tool they were trying to use, which was doing a thing called AI poisoning. And what that does is kind of feed fake data into the training data to kind of force it into a different way. So in this case, what they were doing was they were taking the normal training data, and what this training data does is just basically look at pictures of cats, as you do on the internet, and kind of work out, is that a picture of a cat, yes or no? What they were then doing was feeding fake data into poison data that was basically making those cat images be tagged as dogs. So then as they were doing more and more and trying to say, give me a picture of a cat, actually a picture of a dog appears. And this was a way of kind of doing that. So they were trying to see, is there a method of doing this where you can kind of feed that training data into it and make a completely false answer come out from the AI? Now, that's one way of doing it. It's more kind of seeing that kind of where we don't know a lot of the time, where it's kind of closed, a black box kind of thing for the AI. You don't know how it's been drawn, where the data's been drawn from. You can't really tell what's happening with that training data. So you can't tell, as you were saying beforehand, kind of where that bias is input, because you don't know where the data sources come from. Whereas this way was just kind of a method of trying to see if you can push other data sources into something and then get something else out of it. So maybe something along those lines. But yes, I think you would initially need to know kind of what your original data source is, to kind of see what the inherent biases are in there, to then see, can you sort it? Can it kind of, is it kind of light on a certain section that you would need to kind of fill it up with more data points to kind of get a more reasonable answer?
And I suppose just to follow on in sort of a similar vein, one of the challenges is knowing the limitations of our data sets. So you don't know where it's coming from, you don't know what's there, and you don't know, more importantly, you don't know what's not there. So you don't know what's not included, you can't see what's not included. So there will be biases that come from the size of the data set, the population that's included, and more importantly, what's not included. So you can get into situations where you're addressing specific contexts or specific issues, but there's a lot of data that's simply not part of your data set, and you don't even realize that. And therein, I suppose, lies another major challenge, another bias source.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've had some still experience. I've run some MSc projects at the moment. So I've got someone using IBM have a toolkit where you can try and assess the strength of a machine learning algorithm by looking at how you can poison its data set effectively. So it's seen as kind of an attack vector for these systems is if you can manipulate the data. So those are where you're taking a machine learning model and give it one data set, and then take the data set, manipulate it, and try and train it in a way that gives you an outcome you want. And again, the idea is, I think we're looking at, could you then do that by sort of poisoning public data to create similar effects? So there are people looking at that. I think this would be if you're trying to alter live AI systems. So you try and start publishing data now, and then look, does ChatGPT, for example, or Bard start changing? So doing kind of experimental attacks is, we've done it in technology in academia for years to explore security aspects within your kind of sandbox for security testing. If you start applying that to live systems, that's a different thing. But I suppose people could look at it in terms of things like white hat hacking, that people are hacking for good rather than trying to break security and then tell people about it. But still, the ethics around that are still very questionable about if you're taking other people's platforms and attacking them, even if you tell them later, that's a questionable ethical activity. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues around these systems in terms of a bias that maybe in them. As you say, there's many examples of systems that have been shown to be biased. And yeah, there's a lot of research going on to understand those biases and try and see, can we ensure data sets are fairer in the first place, to avoid biased systems being created. And then also research now, we're looking at how can we try and protect systems against people misusing them. Again, there's that famous examples. One of the early, the Microsoft's chatbot at one point where people quickly trained it to come out with some quite racist statements. And again, it's sometimes these systems are not intelligent in an actual sense. Again, was an example recently, wasn't it? I think in a court case where they sort of was using it and it was echoing back things to do with no intelligence, and so it wasn't being intentionally trained or biased there. It was just doing what it did without any checks, which goes by the ethical side. If a developer set off with an ethical first perspective, you might have put more checks in. Yeah, it's certainly a big issue. So there's another question appeared from Neil Taylor. So yeah, looking at AI-based searches now, looking at more recent data from the web. Yeah, because again, one of the things with ChatGPT 3 as an example, I think over the last year or so, many things at universities like Hull here, people were looking at how we set assignments and quickly worked out, well, if you put the assignment and put in it something about compare this thing to a news item in last year, it would stop and say, I've only got training data up until 2021. Whereas now these platforms are using live internet data. That's creating new challenges in their use. So again, any panel aware of discussion about the risks of using current information on these AI-based search systems?
I can jump in on that. So a couple of thoughts on this. One is I used to work in radio, and in radio, we'd have this thing called a 10-second delay. And we'd have that in case somebody said an expletive and we needed to beep it out or something like that. And so it was a little bit of a caution in terms of what was being actually broadcast. And I think about this in terms of this question, because as we come more and more into real time and data is flowing in real time, and now these things are just happening so fast that there literally is no pause or gap or sort of mechanism to say, oh, that was just based on, you know, data from September 2021 or whatever the first iteration of ChatGPT was. So that's one thought. And then the other piece that comes to mind for me is this idea of a system that fundamentally works on probabilities and has a probabilistic way of kind of, I'll use the quote, thinking in air quotes about things, but delivered in a deterministic way in search. So when we search for something, we're kind of looking for the answer to our question. And in traditional search, we might get served up a bunch of different options, and then we dig into those options and we verify things. But the way this is happening now is we search for the answer to our question, and a probabilistic mechanism delivers something that seems like this is the answer. This is the one and only answer to your question. And I worry about that because I think it then kind of absolves us of doing any more research. We've got the answer to our question and here it is. And yet behind the scenes, it's all about probabilities and what's more likely, and there could be mistakes being made or inaccurate information being served up.
On my side, in terms of risk, if it's more current data, then it's just more data. And that's just more processing on top of that. It's just going to become a bigger issue. So it's kind of like if you're already thinking that, oh, now it's already using this much resource and this much thing, if it's working off of live data, it's got to work much faster on that kind of side of it. So you're already getting that. But then also, as you're saying with the like 10-second delay almost, there's no option now. If you've got less time to kind of error check or do any kind of checking beforehand or testing, you're just getting all this live data being thrown in. So if you are trying to look for these biases or anything else, you've got more of a task now to kind of look at this more live data. So yeah, extra risk on that side, I think.
And again, I suppose, again, expanding on that, I think we've seen with recent conflicts, I started by talking about alternative truth and different views that people have. As you get data in real time, you're not sure about the provenance, you're not sure about the quality of the data, you're just acting on it. So there's a question of, do you need to wait? Do you need to seek confirmation first, or do you act on it immediately? And if immediacy is the driving factor, perhaps you're looking at whether or not to invest in something and you want the hottest, freshest information, then you may take action. But on the other hand, if you if you're a new service and you're getting different views, you maybe want to wait a bit longer and decide on the quality of the data before you're using it. So I suppose, again, it goes to purpose and how it's being used.
Thanks, everyone. Neil, any sort of close on that?
Yeah, well, okay. Thanks very much for that. That was really interesting. I mean, I guess I'm thinking about things like, you know, the bias and the poisoning and the looming notable elections in countries and the influence that might bring. And I guess classic search, I don't know how current the results are with classic search, but it's quite a quick turnaround, isn't it, from information being available to it being something we can see. And I just wonder how much they're vetting it with the AI tools, but it's hard to see. It's, you know, it's the as you say, a probabilistic look at the data, and it's just making a best guess about what it'll give you. I wonder if people can spam it. I wonder if people can try to deliberately poison it when, you know, by getting enough information into the right places. I don't know, it's a new challenge, but it's an interesting, I hadn't thought about it until you were discussing issues, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Okay, so we'll have time for maybe 2 more questions for this part of the evening. So I've asked the committee for a few ideas, and one that I think Ben suggested was looking at the maybe sort of reason for doing some of this. Goes back to a question at the start, maybe why is ethics important? So am I doing my duties as a professional if I comply with the law?
Okay, maybe I'll jump in there. The law offers the sort of the minimal, the starting point. So it's a basic position. These are the things you have to do. Then we get into much bigger problems around the law also take a long, legal processes take a long time. So it takes a long time to codify, to define everything, and to start looking at all the precedents and the cases and refine what's being done. Very often our ideas go way, moral ideas and ethical ideas go way beyond that. So if we're looking at things like slavery was legal at some point, no votes for women was again something that we were doing, but you can argue all of those things, and when we know something is not right, it will take the legal system a long time to catch up. Ethics and morality allow you to use different codes to look at the judgment and say, is this acceptable? I know I'm doing the minimum legal requirement, but is this an acceptable way of behaving? So ethics gives us a more nuanced and a deeper understanding of behaviors, and we can start looking at harms even when they're not specified in the law. Even if the law is not up to date, we can act more humanly, perhaps, which may take us back to AI, and can we expect the same? But certainly with ethics, it is about applying some moral judgment that goes beyond the set of rules and codes and that have been accepted as the minimal requirement. So I think it's much richer and much more responsible to try to act in a moral or ethical ways.
I'd probably use, yeah, I totally agree with that, because it's literally sorry, the minimum that you can do for an IT professional, because it's just like, well, I did it, I can do it, yeah, it's possible, but it's not whether you should do it is more the question. I think it probably goes back to what Katrina was saying as well, about risk. Again, you can kind of do these kind of things, but there's then that kind of visual and risk of what that looks like for you. So for yourself and for your business, if you can, like, yeah, sure, we did that and it's legal to do that thing, but it's like, should you have been doing that? It's kind of, was that fair to do? Was that kind of right to do? And it's that kind of level of it. So it's probably not. And then, and again, it's kind of, as you were saying before, it's kind of, your employees might say, well, yes, I can do this, but I don't want to do it for this company because I don't feel it's right, and then move on or go wherever else they're doing. So yeah, sorry, I'm stealing most of what you've already said. But yeah, agree with that.
Yeah, totally echo those points. I always say compliance is the floor and ethics is the ceiling. So, you know, you got to do the bare minimum. So you can call that doing your duty, but it has to go beyond that.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bernd, that was your question. I think, do you want to add anything to it? If not, I thought I was again linking in with some of the things discussed already. I thought one thing might be.
Can I just jump in with one more comment?
Yep.
Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's moral as well. So legal gives us certain guidelines, but just because something is legal doesn't mean it's moral, acceptable, equitable, fair. So we need additional ways of judging what we are doing. Legal takes time to happen. It's behind the curve. When we recognize that something is that we need to change, and we start creating new legal precedents and laws and rules, we're running behind. Morality is, yeah, it's back to that ceiling, when the ceiling is running ahead of the floor sometimes.
Yeah, so the screen share I've got there is sort of a baseline, personal behaviour, with broad implications. As ChatGPT has asked it to answer that question. It's interesting. It's getting quite ethical in its answers. At least it sounds ethical, even if it's potentially faking it. So maybe time for one final question from the pre-asked. Again, it was from Bernd. This is again, as BCS members, how much time or resources do you think you should really be looking at spending on ethics? I guess it's something that we face ethical conundrums. It can help to contextualize it by understanding issues. But how much time or resource do you think we should be investing in ethics as a general BCS professional member?
Okay, so I'll jump in. I suppose there's the personal and there's the organizational perspective. Normally we apply, certainly ethics comes from a profession. At a personal level, we want to be comfortable with a decision. So I don't know if we can specify a time, but if you're lying awake at night thinking whether or not it's the right thing to do, you're probably not spending enough time. If you keep hearing all kinds of only this time we'll do it, and you feel something is wrong, you probably know you're not spending enough time, or more to the point, you're unable to deal with it within your organizational setup, which takes us to the organizational level. I'm actually on the ethics and governance board of a large organization, and it's kind of interesting to see some of the challenges. So you don't get to look at everything. People come to you when they have ethical challenges, and sometimes I find myself thinking, okay, is this really an ethical issue? There's the intersection between business and ethics, or the point, this is going to cost me more. When that comes into it, are you still being ethical? That starts becoming a business issue. And on occasion, I've heard people turning around to us and saying, no, this is a business decision. And you're thinking, yes, but your employees have raised it. And so there are all kinds of borders and gray areas. But once you start looking at some of the implications, and certainly at the organizational level, it becomes rather complex. So it's nice if there are ways of, beyond the codes, people start with codes and hope that the codes are enough. Of course, often it's not. So you need to go beyond ethical codes, and you need to have ways for people to not necessarily go into whistleblowing mode, but have conversations. And this was the purpose of the ethics boards the time on, to really give employees a chance to talk to someone beforehand. But you will always get the company, the business, the government, whoever it is saying, yeah, but this is our core, this is a business decision. So sometimes it's difficult to create a space to think about something as an ethical dilemma and an ethical problem, because the business says, no, this is what we do. You don't have any say in here. So it's the balance between the individuals who are not sleeping at night, and if they're really not sleeping at night, something is wrong, and the organization doing the business, and also trying to satisfy values and expectations, and still being within CSR and with full consideration to all other concerns that they may have.
I want to challenge the framing of this question just a little bit, because when I hear this question, I hear something like, well, how much time should I spend breathing? And I think about, I think about it in that context. And so what I've been trying to do is when I talk to technologists, I say to them, ethics is never a one and done. And just like we all have time, we make time to brush our teeth, we realize that that's an important thing we need to do. We don't just do it once, we do it again and again. How do we make that a habit that's natural for your organization? And how do we actually shift your whole culture so that you see ethics not as this thing that is going to be an expense and let's get it out of the way, or let's avoid it, or let's try, to do as little as possible. And instead sort of embrace it and make it woven into your culture. How do we actually get there? And I think about where we started this conversation and some of the attitudes that we're having to overcome, perhaps, with certain people that are working in the profession. I think there's a lot of work there to be done. But I think in order to get ethics to a place where it becomes just part of your culture and not really, we won't ask these kinds of questions then. We'll just go ahead and we'll do what's necessary to weave it into the work that we do. So that's kind of my take on this. It doesn't really say, 10% or 25% or anything like that, but I think it needs to be this thing that's just incorporated into the work.
I think I'll go even another route on that. I read it again a totally different way. I read it as kind of almost kind of what as a BCS member, like an individual member, can do in terms of ethics. And I feel there's quite a lot of resources via the BCS. To be fair, there's quite a few things. We've got the new thing that Josh has been putting up as well with the which is coming out soon, I think, with the CPD kind of method of ethics and ethics governance. Can't speak my words, but of how to kind of like learn different techniques and things from the very basics of ethics. So kind of a lot of these IT professionals who have always said like, I don't need it, I don't need to know it, and now it's kind of becoming more ingrained into their businesses, more things like that, then maybe it's kind of like, well, I do need to know this. I do need to have to actually learn about what these things are and what is this kind of fairness and trust and all this kind of stuff. So it's nice to know that there's kind of like, there is all those options within BCS to kind of have some training, some additional courses on it as well. And again, there's always kind of like the BCS community who are more than happy to kind of talk to people and ask them and help them on that. But in terms of kind of more business related, it can be more kind of having those kind of groups and soundboards for people as well to kind of talk off and do that. But yeah, trying to put a number on that, it's not possible. It's got to be included in your normal kind of training, either within work or within out of work kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Ben, do you have any follow-up on that as well, or? Again, I was curious what ChatGPT may say. It did actually give an answer though. It says a few hours a month. So there can be guidance on this. I think sometimes it also maybe it's like that frame of mind of just seeing things in ethical context generally. Sometimes think even like watching science fiction films and things, and the ethical dilemmas you see there, we're seeing now, around us, virtual reality, AI, robots, the kind of things. I read a sort of Asimov was a child, sort of iRobot and things, and they're the sort of things we're facing now. So I think it can actually be something isn't it's not having to do a course on ethics and learn ethics, but it's more of, like I say, a mindset of being aware of it, but then applying it in different contexts yourself. So homework, etc. I was at took my son out early today to the shop and having made a purchase. They asked for my email address for my receipt. So I was telling him it, and he suddenly blurted out, "What are you doing? That's private information." And he'd had an e-safety course this week at school, being told not to share your personal information with people. So it's okay. I give my email address out to this company, but yeah, appreciating that there's all the ethical data protection issues around that, and I'll probably get spammed by things from that shop. But it's interesting. Again, it's just that ethics everywhere approach, I guess. Thanks everyone. So yeah, it was a really good discussion. We've gone just over 7 o'clock in terms of the panel part. So I'd like to sort of bring the panel element to an end. If there's anything anyone would like to finish with, if panelists have any final comments you want to make. Darren, yeah.
Okay. Just to close on the last one, I think it's also there are lots of ways of interpreting the question. So, but I think that perhaps a way of concluding it's a hallmark of professionalism. So a BCS member would be interested or should be concerned with professionalism. So sufficient time, rather than give it time, sufficient time to do it due process as needed to deal with the seriousness of not sleeping at night to address the problem. I suppose that I kind of expected us to move towards autonomous cars or swarms of drones and whether or not we're going to trust them or not with AI, and we didn't quite get there. But in a way, in closing, you started by asking what is ethics. So ethics is also knowing whether or not we can, and the answer to students is, do you want AI to make the decisions for autonomous cars, for swarms of drones, deciding whether or not to kill someone? So it's also developing the systems, the mindsets, and the ability to address some of these concerns. And that's something that should resonate for most of us. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Katrina, do you want to your final comments?
Sure. I'll just close by saying thank you so much for inviting me here. I really enjoyed the conversation today. Obviously, there's always way more to say than you can say in a panel. I write a lot about these issues. I have a blog on my website, ethicallyalignedai.com, if you're interested in hearing some of my other thoughts on these issues, or if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I would love that. I'd love to carry on the conversation with you, but thanks again for this opportunity.
Thanks. And Adam?
Yeah, likewise. Just thank you so much for inviting me onto this panel, and yeah, much there.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we're going to have a short presentation of some of the results from our recent survey on ethics and AI, which is linked this morning with Darren's point, some of the growing issues of it in practice. So I'll share my screen and go for these. Adam and Bernd sort of leading on the development of this. So equally, if they want to add comments to it and things to it as I go through, again, feel free to unmute yourself and drop in. Again, given time, I won't spend too long on it, just really highlighting some of the upcoming things you'll see in the white paper when it's published. So I'll share my screen. A different slide deck. So say we ran a survey of members on ethics and AI. So this was sent out to BCS professional members. We asked for wider views on ethical issues that they met, not just on ethics and AI itself, but on wider ethical challenges. And we got well over 1,000, say nearly well over 1,300 answers from members. So it was a big survey, a lot of data. The answers highlight some of the needs in the sector and beyond. Again, we thank the BCS team centrally who helped deliver the survey, did the initial analysis for us. They passed Adam and Ben to myself the summary results, as well as some of the sort of raw data. So I've picked out a few highlights that I thought might be interesting today, just to briefly pick up, and then we'll probably have a follow-up event once the white paper is officially published, which should be in a few weeks' time. So I don't know, do you want to talk to these, Adam? I think these came from your original highlights of the paper.
Yeah, I can read them out if you want. So originally we had 88% of participants believe it's important that the UK government take a lead in shaping global ethics standards in AI and other high-stakes technologies. So again, it was kind of quite a good timing, especially with the kind of the Bletchley Park and the AI Summit. So it was good that kind of like people find out that it's an important thing for the UK government to do, and they try to do something. So it was quite good for that side. Again, the second point kind of goes to what we were saying again on kind of employees and what they're looking for. So when considering working for a partnership with an organization, 90% of people were stating that the reputation of for ethical use in technology is important. So again, as we were saying, it is important to a lot, well, pretty much nearly everybody, to have these kind of ethical standards. 82% think that the UK organisation should be required to publish ethical policies. So again, this is kind of good on that side as well. So all of these results, sorry, going on. All these results, as you can see, are very high numbers on this side. There's a lot. There's not kind of like mid-range kind of thing. There's a lot of people kind of leaning very strongly to a lot of these kind of situations. Same with the other side as well. So again, not only kind of publishing policies, but a lot of IT professionals also want to have, so 81% here, want to have a ethical kind of professional standard as well. So all sides that we're seeing where people kind of are looking to have that kind of high level governance, but also kind of having that kind of policy shared around companies. So the company is ethical, they can show that the professional can show they're ethical and that they're working for an ethical company.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So again, we asked the respondents about how they faced ethical challenges, and go back, I guess, for the panel discussion about ethics and sort of why. And again, it was a small proportion who said he had, in terms of yes was just nearly 20%, nearly a fifth. Interesting, was sort of 12% who weren't really sure, which kind of again indicates maybe that people aren't always clear, is it ethical or not? I think something that Darren mentioned earlier, I think there's that sometimes a grey area, is that ethical? I probably imagine in many cases, if you think it is, it probably is, but equally it shows us that uncertainty amongst people. Another point that was, I think the panel covered earlier, was about the why ethics and the fact that it might affect where people work. And again, we could see that in the response. Obviously, it's partly maybe self-selective in people who chose to complete a survey on ethics and technology and AI. But for people that did respond, 6% of them felt it's very important, 30% important. So that's a lot of people that think about this ethical use of technology in companies they may go on to work for, which again is a driver for why businesses might engage with this, was one of the questions that was asked. One of the reasons we sort of timed the report when we did was to be able to release it just before the Bletchley Park Summit. And part of that was to look at, could we encourage or put more pressure on UK government in particular to look at taking on that ethical lead. And again, amongst the respondents, we had a lot of them, say 89% there, pretty much saying it was important, very important, that the UK takes its lead in ethical standards. So it shows we have this need really to think about ethics and try and decide how should we use these technologies appropriately and effectively. And it does reflect that wider concerns you're seeing in the media amongst the general public about the use of AI. And going about one of the questions that Bernd had asked about the sort of how much time or what should we do in terms of resources for ethics. Again, a lot of the people who responded, so 82% feel it's important that we should be demonstrating ethical credentials through professional standards. So For example, there's one of the resources for BCS I've currently, there's one of the 3 CPD courses you can do on this ethical IT professional. There's other courses on, particularly on ethics and AI as well. So it's really showing that we're informed and making in the choices we make, and we have sort of our own frameworks, I guess, for how we do that. I was not saying necessarily we more make the same choices, but they wanted that recognition that people have some sort of standards around their ethical behaviour, which again is something we sort of fed back through the report to the BCS and other professional bodies. These are a few of the quotes we got back from some of the respondents, which highlighted some of the concerns you can see in the sector. Again, Adam, I think you picked out some of these. Do you want to maybe highlight some of them?
Sure. So I think the first one was kind of more kind of like a good example. So people were when they were like, how did your organization support you in that? In this case, it's kind of like the person was listened to, there was policies in place, there's things on that side. So there is a route for the person to kind of say, can I discuss this? What is this? What should we do with this? But there was quite a bit within the results where we were seeing people where there was stuff where it's kind of like, I did not get any support. I was kind of left to it to kind of do it myself. So there are these IT professionals who aren't getting help. There is no guidance. There is no policy within their company to kind of help them through these decisions. So a lot of the time they're having to do it themselves, or in fact, not even do it. The scary side for us was more seeing the kind of the ones near the bottom, where it was kind of people are kind of raise the issue, and there are IT professionals who kind of raising those issues, bring them to their managers, bring them to whatever kind of level they want, and they're just being ignored, or worse, being threatened in work. This is where it's kind of like there needs to be kind of something there. So as we were saying with the governmental policies, if there's kind of like legal parts to it, or if there are kind of other standards or whistleblowing kind of lines that will help these IT professionals to kind of raise that issue and not be ignored and not be threatened through their work. I think there was another one we saw somewhere else as well, where it was kind of like going back to that situation we were saying of people wanting to work for an ethical company. There's some cases where it's kind of like, I wasn't listened to, I left. And that's kind of a very strong answer to it, of kind of, if these organizations are not providing that kind of policy and not listening, then their employees will leave.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, so there's a lot more in the report itself when it comes out. We looked at recommendations for governments, industry. Highlights for today might be more for the professional bodies. So we looking at things to recommend, things like having training accreditation options to help people in framing ethical challenges. Looking at standards for organisations to adopt. Something as a committee we've been discussing a lot about. Can we have like an ethical kite mark for companies? And look at learning from elsewhere. So other countries are facing the same challenges, trying to find the best solution. So some of the new published standards, for example, in Europe, might be things we could look at adopting. And then as individuals, professionals, going back to one of the questions in the panel earlier, looking at the professional development has that ethical concerns in it, particularly current ones as AI is changing requirements. Looking at specialist knowledge we might need for that. Again, one of the questions about the sort of injecting bad data into AI systems. Being aware of that can help you make some ethical choices about how you use the systems, think about protecting them. Again, as professionals, looking at assisting in developing these ethical standards and good practice, and helping the general public with that. And I've done a few talks on local radio here as part of my sort of university link to the local city. But again, explain to people about the way that AI can be used and misused. Obviously, as technologists, we're very aware of this and are in a good place to defend ourselves, even if people often still get caught out of the general public. There's a lot more lack of knowledge about the possible misuse. So that was a very whistle-stop summary of that. You could Adam and Bernd, if I think I've missed anything, feel free to add to that. There will be this white paper out soon. I'd say it was published partly before the Lecture Park Summit as the highlights by BCS, and they're finalising the document itself. So when that's available, we publish that through BCS. We'll announce it on the ethics specialist group email list as well. So and following that launch, we'll maybe look at having a follow-up meeting to go through some more detail of that. Adam, Bernd, anything else you want to add? Okay, so
sorry. Just the maybe that's not for this part of the conversation, but for the next part, for the AGM part. But I think we should probably have a conversation, in particular with regards to the recommendations that you've just shown that we put in there, basically for ourselves, right? How we want to take this forward. I think that to me is really the challenge that we're facing now.
Yeah, I think one of the things we'll look at in the AGM is how we can look at other events to follow up and other mechanisms to pursue that. So I know we've got a few discussions on using more of the data that we gathered from members. So the white paper is a summary of some highlights of that. There's deeper analysis we can do, which we're talking about. The white paper itself will be a catalyst, I guess, for some discussions in some places. But yeah, a big feature, I think, Bernd, going forward is going to be how we want to, as a committee, carry that forward, and then within the wider group that are here today. Again, any questions from the audience around this before we move on to the AGM itself? So if nothing urgent, and while there's still enough people for quorum, I guess, for Paul, should we move over to the AGM, Paul?